She waited 7 years to marry a man she saved, but he left her at the altar. After nursing a wounded fugitive back to life and loving him for 7 years, Clara is shattered on their wedding day. But as he vanishes, a stranger steps in with a shocking twist. Chapter 1. The gunshot echoes in Abilene in the year 1872. Abilene, Kansas. A dusty frontier town clinging to the last breath of the Wild West boom. Abilene wasn't the kind of place that kept secrets for long. Gossip galloped faster than any horse, and people's past had a habit of catching up with them. But on the outskirts of town, in a weather-beaten cabin nestled near Blue Creek, lived a young woman whose own story was just beginning to unfold like the pages of a tragic dime novel. Her name was Clara May Whitmore, 23, stunning in a quiet, unassuming way. With mahogany hair always tied in a low bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, Clara was the kind of beauty frontier poets would have written songs about, if they weren't too busy trying to stay alive. She had been orphaned at 16 when a prairie fire swept through their homestead, leaving her alone with a wooden cross, a blackened farmhouse, and debts no one came to collect. Yet Clara didn't complain. She worked odd jobs, mending clothes, gathering herbs, cleaning rooms at the saloon when times got hard. Her grace was quiet, her strength quieter still. Then came the night everything changed. A gunshot. Close. Too close. She'd been gathering water under a silver moon when she heard it, a single crack echoing through the still night. She froze, staring toward the shadows by the creek. Then came the groan. A man's. She approached cautiously, lantern in hand. What she found looked more ghost than man. His coat was torn, blood soaking through the side. He had a pistol gripped weakly in one hand and a wanted poster crumpled in the other. His face, pale, covered in dust, was too handsome for a dead man, and yet he lived. Clara dragged him inside, stitched him up the best she could, and stayed by his side for 3 nights straight until the fever broke. His name, he said, was Baron Elijah Crow. She didn't ask about the poster, didn't pry. She only knew 2 things. He was hunted, and he was hurt. But Clara had always had a habit of loving broken things. In the weeks that followed, Elijah healed. He was guarded at first, like a wolf sniffing for traps, but gradually let his charm unfold. He told stories. He helped fix the fence. He played her father's old fiddle out on the porch. By the time the winter snows came, they were in love, or something like it. Elijah kissed her on the first night the creek froze. Clara thought her heart might melt the ice around them. No one came looking for him. And for the next 7 years, they built a life, a simple one. She'd call him Baron, half teasingly, never knowing if it was a title, a nickname, or something darker. He never explained. But Clara didn't care. Not until the wedding day. Not until the morning she walked down the aisle in a handmade ivory dress and stood alone. No carriage, no groom, just townsfolk whispering, eyes darting, pity gathering like clouds before a storm. But what no one expected, what Clara never expected, was that another baron was watching from the crowd, one who had loved her from afar, one who wouldn't let her break again. Chapter 2. The Baron Who Vanished Like Smoke. The church bells of Abilene rang at noon, not because it was a wedding, but because the bride was still standing at the altar, refusing to move. Clara May Whitmore, radiant in ivory dress she'd stitched herself over 6 quiet months, stood frozen before the cross. Her hands trembled slightly, her bouquet wilting under the Kansas sun. The preacher, bless his soul, had stalled as long as he could, even started reading from Psalms like the groom was just late from shoeing his horse. But Baron Elijah Crow never came. The pews murmured. Old Mrs. Cartwright clutched her pearls. Sheriff Dillon, seated in the back with his Sunday hat in his hands, muttered something about a man with too many shadows. Clara blinked against the sunlight flooding through the stained glass windows. The smell of dust and lavender clung to the air like a bad memory. Then someone gasped. Outside the chapel, the townsfolk gathered near the road, where a lone carriage had just kicked up dust and turned around without stopping. Inside, a flash of dark coat, a man tipping his hat low to shield his face. Elijah, he'd been here. Long enough to see her, long enough to leave. Clara's heart didn't break. No, it shattered in silence like a glass drop in snow. No sound, just emptiness. She didn't cry, not in front of Abilene. She walked out of the church, her back straight, bouquet still in hand. She passed her old employer, Miss Nellie from the saloon, past her landlord, past the preacher still clutching the Book of Ruth. And then she passed him, a stranger in a black waistcoat with a golden watch chain, leaning against a post with eyes like sharpened flint. Baron Silas DeWitt. He had been watching her for months, ever since his arrival to inspect land in Abilene's North Ridge. He never approached her, never dared, until now. Miss Whitmore, he said, his voice low but steady. May I have a word? Clara blinked, dazed. She stared at him as if through fog. It's not a good time, sir. Silas tipped his hat. I know, but I reckon fate just carved you a new road. If you'll trust me, I'd be proud to walk beside you. The crowd gasped. Old Mrs. Cartwright dropped her parasol. A child whispered, Is this part of the show? But it wasn't a show. Silas stepped forward, took the bouquet from her trembling hands, and gently offered his arm. I'm not asking for your heart, he said. Only a chance to help you heal. For the first time that day, Clara breathed. The preacher, sensing something divine, or at least dramatic, looked skyward and muttered, Well, I suppose the Lord works fast. And so, under the same chapel roof where she had waited for a man who ran from love, Clara married a man brave enough to walk into her storm. But the story doesn't end there, because Baron Elijah Crow was watching from the hills, and he wasn't gone for good. Chapter 3, The Letter Hidden Beneath the Floorboard. 2 weeks had passed since Clara May Whitmore went from jilted bride to wife of one of the richest men in the territory. Baron Silas DeWitt wasn't just wealth. He was dignity wrapped in a waistcoat. He didn't flinch when townsfolk whispered. He didn't raise his voice when Clara stared blankly at her food during dinner. He just waited, kindly, patiently, like a man who knew the difference between love earned and love owed. They'd moved into the manor north of Abilene, a tall, sun-bleached house with wide porches and creaky floors that held too many secrets. One afternoon, as the wind rattled the shutters and the prairie rustled like whispers in a graveyard, Clara went exploring. She wasn't looking for ghosts, but she found one. It was in the smallest room of the manor, a study Silas had sealed off, saying only, That room holds where I used to be. Clara waited until he was off meeting a railroad surveyor. Then curiosity got the better of her. The study was dim, air thick with the scent of aged paper and whiskey memories. Dust coated everything but the desk, which had been recently disturbed. She pulled open the drawers. Nothing moved the rug, just floorboards. Then she noticed a faint scratch, like something had been pried up before. Clara knelt and wedged her fingers beneath one plank, lifted and revealed a hollow. Inside, wrapped in oilskin and tied with faded ribbon, was a letter, addressed not to Silas, but to her, to Clara May if I am gone. Her hands trembled. The handwriting was unmistakable. She had memorized the swoop of every sea, the way the ink always thickened on the word love. Elijah. She looked around the room, heart pounding as if he were standing behind her. She opened the letter slowly, breath shallow, fingers tight. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it to the altar. I know what you're thinking, that I left you because I'm a coward. But the truth is worse. 7 years ago, you found me bleeding in the canyon. I told you I was a baron from New Orleans, shot by thieves. That part was true, but I didn't tell you why they shot me. I wasn't running from men. I was running from justice. Before I met you, I worked for a powerful man, Baron Hartford. He owned half of Louisiana and traded the other half in secrets and lies. I saw things, Clara, signed papers, helped him bury the kind of truth that gets people killed. When I tried to walk away, he sent his men. That bullet was a warning. But marrying you, that made me a target again. The night before our wedding, I received word that Hartford knew about you. He swore he'd burn everything I loved, starting with your name. So I left, because if I stayed, you'd be dead. I don't know if this makes me a villain or a fool, but I did it for you. If Silas ever finds this letter, tell him I'm sorry for dragging you into my sins. But Clara, if fate ever brings me back to Abilene, I will not run again. Elijah, the letter fell from her hands. Her breath came in short, shocked gasps. Elijah hadn't left her for another woman. He'd left her to save her. And now, she was married to the only man who had ever rivaled Elijah's shadow. Clara didn't know whether to cry or scream. But one thing was clear. Elijah wasn't a ghost. He was a fuse waiting to be lit. Chapter 4. Smoke on the Horizon. The letter sat like a curse in Clara's drawer. Each night, she read it again, whispering Elijah's words like a secret prayer. By day, she smiled beside her new husband and tried to silence the war in her heart. Silas was gentle, noble even, but Elijah was wildfire in a world of safe lanterns. She didn't know what was worse, that Elijah might be dead or that he might still be out there, watching. Then came the smoke. It began at dawn, thin, gray trails curling over the distant hills like fingers searching for something to destroy. Clara stood on the front porch in her nightgown, the crisp Texas wind lifting her hair. Silas rode out at once to find the source. He told her not to worry, but the pit in her stomach told her otherwise. By noon, the sheriff came. Sheriff Grady Cook was a color of worn leather, with eyes sharp as the edge of his badge. He tipped his hat to Clara, though he didn't smile. "Ma'am," he said, glancing back at the soot on his sleeves, "I reckon there's something you ought to know." She led him inside. "A ranch 2 counties over caught fire," he said, removing his hat. "Nothing but ashes now. Belonged to a man named Avery Goss. Claimed he saw a stranger riding through 2 nights ago. Fit the description of an outlaw we've been chasing for years." Clara's mouth went dry. What did he look like? Tall, dark hair, scar over his temple. Said he limped some. Wore a black duster, like he'd stepped out of a dime novel. Elijah, it had to be. Sheriff Cook narrowed his eyes. "You seen anybody like that around here?" Clara hesitated. Too long. The silence creaked between them like a closing door. I haven't," she lied, "but I'll keep an eye out." He nodded once, though he didn't believe her. "Tell Baron DeWitt to check the stables and secure the grounds. If this outlaw's coming through, he's got a reason. Outlaws like him don't ride for sightseeing." Clara closed the door behind him, heart thudding so loud she could hear it echo. Elijah had returned to Texas. But why? To reclaim her? To finish whatever he started? Or, worse, had he come to expose a truth that Silas had buried? That night, Clara heard a knock at the back door. Not loud, just 3 soft taps. She froze in the parlor, candle in hand. Silas wasn't home yet. He'd stayed behind to help the sheriff with the fire. The house was dark, quiet. Even the wind had stopped. She crept toward the kitchen, heart hammering. Tap, tap, tap. She opened the door, slow, just a crack, and saw nothing. No one, just a small leather pouch on the steps. She snatched it up and bolted the door. Inside was a single silver button, the one Elijah wore on the lapel of his wedding coat, and a note. Some fires are lit to find the truth. Clara staggered back, staring at the words. He was here, watching, waiting, and whatever secret he carried was about to set her entire world on fire. Chapter 5. A Stranger at the Barn Dance. The Abilene Harvest Dance was the biggest event of the fall, a yearly celebration where boots tapped, fiddles sang, and secrets rustled louder than corn stalks in the wind. Clara didn't want to go, but Silas insisted. "Folk need to see us together," he said, adjusting his vest in the mirror. "It's been 5 months, Clara. Let's give them a reason to stop whispering." She nodded, slipping on a deep burgundy dress with lace sleeves and a cinched waist, one that used to make Elijah's eyes darken with hunger and hope. The barn was lit with lanterns strung from beam to beam, casting golden halos on weathered wood. Couples swirled across the hay-dusted floor, skirts spinning like autumn leaves. Silas was all smiles, shaking hands with ranchers and bankers, laughing at jokes that Clara couldn't hear over the drumbeat in her chest. Because someone was watching her. She felt it, not just the curious stares from townsfolk still scandalized by her whirlwind wedding. No, this was sharper, heavier, as if someone's memory had taken physical form and was threading its way through the crowd. Then she heard it, a haunting tune from the far corner of the barn, slow, mournful, familiar, a violin, the opening notes of The Lark's Lament, her and Elijah's song. Clara turned. There he was, the violinist, wearing a worn black coat and a red bandana over the lower half of his face. His fingers moved like ghosts over the strings, coaxing the melody from the instrument like he was pulling it from her bones. She stepped closer, drawn by the sound, by the possibility. But just as she reached the edge of the crowd, a hand caught hers. "Silas, care for a dance, darling?" She hesitated, glanced back, but the violinist was gone, vanished, like smoke in a windstorm. Later, Clara stood alone near the punch bowl, trying to steady her breath. A note was tucked between the silver cups, folded, with her name on it. She snatched it quickly, hiding it in her skirt. In the barn shadows, she read it under the flickering glow of a lantern. "I never left you, but I had to leave the lies. I'm here for the truth. Clara, yours, Elijah." Her knees went weak. Was he really here? What truth? What lies? And why did it part her, deep down in a hollow place where her love for him still lived, wanting to take her away again? The next morning, Sheriff Cook rode up with news. "The outlaw," he said grimly, "was seen stealing a horse behind the old lumber mill last night, just after the dance." Silas cursed. "The bastard's baiting us." But Clara said nothing, because she knew something Silas didn't. The horse Elijah stole was hers, from her private stable, the one only two people had keys to. Chapter 6, The Midnight Confession. The night air in Abilene had turned cold, too cold for September. Clara sat on the porch swing, the wooden slats creaking beneath her as the stars stared back, silent and distant. Her mind was louder than the wind, replaying every word of the note Elijah had left. "I never left you, but I had to leave the lies." Lies? Her breath caught. Was Elijah hiding from something more than a bounty? Or was someone hiding something from her? She thought of Silas, too perfect, too polished, too convenient. In 7 years, she had watched Elijah build a life with his bare hands. Silas had appeared with one telegram, a church full of roses, and a ring already sized for her finger. It didn't sit right, and neither did the locked drawer in his study. It was nearly midnight when Clara crept inside. Silas was asleep upstairs, his deep snores vibrating through the floorboards like the rumble of distant thunder. She moved barefoot through the parlor, careful not to disturb the brass clock or the spooked cat watching from the stairwell. The drawer in his study was carved from dark walnut, a relic from Silas's supposed Kentucky estate. It had always been locked until now. The key was in his coat pocket. She'd seen it when he returned from a barn dance. Clara had memorized its shape. Now it was in her palm. Click. The drawer slid open with a whisper. Inside was a folded map, a worn Bible, and, tucked inside the back cover, a sepia photograph. She pulled it free. It was Elijah, younger, smiling, standing beside Silas. Her heart nearly stopped. Both men were wearing military uniforms, Confederate gray, their faces covered in soot and pride, and scrawled on the back in smudged ink, "Brothers in Arms, divided by greed. Fort Dodge, 1864-inch. Clara's fingers trembled. She clutched the desk for balance, the truth hitting like a slap. They weren't strangers. They were once allies, maybe even friends, and whatever tore them apart had reached her doorstep. Footsteps. She spun around, clutching the photo. Silas stood in the doorway, candlelight casting shadows across his face. "You're not supposed to see that," he said quietly. Clara didn't flinch. "Then tell me what I'm supposed to see, Silas. Because right now all I see is lies." "Again." He sighed, stepping forward, the charm draining from his voice. "Elijah wasn't the victim you thought he was. He didn't just run from the war. He ran from what he did in it." Clara's voice cracked. And you? I stayed. I cleaned up his mess. And when he disappeared, I came back to make sure he never ruined another soul. Silas's eyes burned. You save him once. Don't make the mistake of doing it again. Clara said nothing, but her eyes dropped to the photograph, proof that her past or present and her heart had been tangled in a web spun long before she knew either man's name. That night, she locked the photo away, because sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It simply changes your prison. Chapter 7. The Letter Beneath the Floorboards. By dawn, Clara hadn't slept a wink. Silas was gone, off to inspect a railway, or so he claimed. But after last night, Clara believed the tracks he was following were less about iron and more about secrets. Her hand trembled as she poured herself coffee. The photo of Elijah and Silas, brothers in arms, burned in her apron pocket like a hidden flame. Every time she looked at Silas now, she could see it. The practiced smile, the perfectly timed rescue, the speed with which he'd married her. It had never been about love. It was about control. And whatever Elijah had done to tear them apart, she had to know. She wandered the house like a ghost until she found herself standing in her old bedroom, the one she and Elijah had shared during the years he was recovering. He used to keep little things there. His compass, a coin from Tennessee, and his sketches, rough drawings of horses, pine trees, and her. Clara sat down on the edge of the bed, worn now by time and loneliness, and traced her fingers along the grooves in the floor. Her hand stopped at a plank that felt loose. Her pulse quickened. She pried it up. There, wrapped in oilcloth and bound by string, was a yellowed envelope. Her name was written on the front in a hand she knew better than her own. To Clara, in case I don't make it to our wedding. Her breath left her lungs in one sharp gasp. She opened it with shaking fingers. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't keep my promise. Not because I didn't want to, but because someone made sure I couldn't. I've run from many things in life, but never from you. Silas isn't who he says he is. He never was. We rode together in the war, yes, but when it ended, he didn't stop fighting. He started trading secrets, blackmailing the wounded, turning old friends into debts. When I tried to leave that life, he made sure I'd never escape clean. He's after something in this town, something buried and not just in the ground. I only stayed as long as I did because of you, but I knew the day would come when he'd force my hand. He left me one choice: stay and endanger you, or disappear and let you hate me. I chose your safety over your love. God forgive me. If there's still a chance, if I can fix this, I will. I promise. Yours. Always. Elijah. Clara's vision blurred as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. He hadn't run from her. He had run for her. Outside, the distant sound of hooves echoed on the road, Silas returning. But Clara wasn't the same woman he left behind that morning. She folded the letter, tucked it into her bodice, and placed the floorboard back in place. Her hands were no longer trembling. They were steady, because now she knew the truth. And when truth is all you have, it becomes your sharpest weapon. Chapter 8. The Trap in the Churchyard. Clara stood at the gates of St. Agnes Church, veil pulled low, heart pounding like a war drum. The same chapel where she'd been abandoned, the same aisle she'd walked down in shame, only to be wed to a stranger in velvet and lies. Now, it would be the place where masks fell and ghosts were dragged into daylight. The letter from Elijah had shattered the last of her doubts. Silas wasn't a savior. He was a strategist, polished, dangerous, and playing a game that spanned years and bloodlines. But he'd underestimated Clara. They always did. She'd sent a message that morning, a forged note penned in a familiar hand, and left under Silas's whiskey decanter. Meet me at the church at sundown. There's something you need to see. Come alone. She knew Silas would go. He couldn't resist a reunion, especially if it meant tying up loose ends. Clara, of course, had no intention of facing him unarmed, not emotionally, and certainly not strategically. She had Father Merlin on it, the grizzled old priest with one blind eye and more secrets than the town's saloon wall. She also had Deputy Granger, half-drunk but loyal, crouched behind the organ with a pistol cocked. But her true weapon? Truth. The church was silent as Silas entered, hat tucked under one arm, coat buttoned tight, like a general heading to battle. "Clara?" he called out, voice echoing through the nave. She stepped out from behind the pulpit. "I thought you might prefer a familiar venue," she said softly, voice steady. Silas froze, eyes narrowing. So Elijah's been writing again. She pulled the letter from her bodice and held it up. "You knew he never left of his own accord. You force him." Silas tilted his head, the way snakes do before striking. "Elijah made choices. Bad ones. I simply offered him consequences." "And what did I get?" She shot back, stepping closer. "A wedding forged in panic. A husband who watched me cry over another man and smiled through it. What kind of man does that?" Silas's smile thinned. The kind who finishes what his brother couldn't. For a moment, silence fell. Then Clara asked a question that had been clawing at her inside since the day of the wedding. "Why me?" He looked genuinely amused. "You were the one piece Elijah valued more than his own life. And what better way to make him hurt than by making you mine?" A gasp rang out from the organ. Deputy Granger had heard enough. He stepped forward, pistol raised. "You're done, Silas." But Clara didn't flinch. She kept her eyes locked on Silas, her voice cold as frostbite. "No, he's just begun." As Granger cuffed Silas, the Baron didn't fight. He simply smiled and whispered in Clara's ear, "You think this ends with me?" She stared back, fire burning in her chest. "No, it ends with truth, and you just handed me the match." Chapter 9. The Stranger from El Paso. The train screeched into Rosebend like a beast disturbed, sending dust spiraling into the evening sky. Out stepped a woman in crimson. Not just crimson like dried blood. No, this was the kind of red that announced power, seduction, and secrets. She wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of her face, but her lips, painted deep burgundy, didn't need a spotlight. Neither did the cane she leaned on, adorned with silver wolf's head that gleamed under the setting sun. Clara watched from the general store porch, half curious, half wary. New arrivals were rare, especially ones dressed like Death had personally picked out their wardrobe. "Name's Luella Ash," the stranger said, her voice like smoke curling around a poker table. "I'm here for the wedding that ended in gunfire and gossip." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You're about 9 days late." Luella smirked. "Darling, I'm exactly on time." By nightfall, Clara and Luella were seated in the Rosebend Inn's parlor, a single lantern between them, casting long shadows on the wallpaper. Luella sipped her whiskey like a lady and spoke like a thief. "Elijah never left Rosebend on his own terms," she began. "Silas didn't just drive him away. He sold him out to a cartel north of Laredo." Clara's heart skipped. "Cartel?" Luella nodded, her rings clinking as she gestured. "Elijah got tangled in something ugly. He owed them money and silence. When he tried to leave that life behind, Silas made sure the debt collectors knew exactly where to find him." Clara's throat tightened. "So he ran." Luella leaned closer, her voice softening. "He ran to protect you." Outside, lightning crackled on the horizon. Inside, Clara felt the walls of her world fracture again. She had hated Elijah for leaving, but now he didn't leave her. He was stolen. "Why are you telling me this now?" Clara asked. "Why you?" Luella pulled a folded, worn photograph from her coat. In it, Elijah was smiling, a little younger, a little more reckless. His arm was around a boy and a girl. Luella pointed at the girl. "That's me. I'm his sister." Clara's hand went to her mouth. "And the boy?" "Gone. Because of Silas." The silence between them settled like fog. Then Luella leaned back. "You have 2 choices, Miss Clara. You can keep surviving on scraps of truth, or you can burn the house of lies down and start again." Clara's eyes met hers, steel rising in them. "Where do we start?" Luella smiled, slow and dangerous. "With a letter and a gun." Chapter 10. A Wedding, a Gunshot, and a Ghost that Came Back. The town square hadn't seen a crowd like this since the railroad arrived. Lanterns glowed like fireflies against the dusk. The church bell rang for an unexpected second wedding, and Clara, in a gown she hadn't expected to wear again, stood next to the man she had promised to forget. But this time it wasn't Elijah. It was Baron Silas Langley, a man adored by half the town, feared by the other half, and detested now by Clara's entire soul. But she'd agreed to marry him again, publicly, not for love, but for a plan that had been months in the making. Luella and Clara had orchestrated everything. A fake engagement, a reappearance in high society, and just enough whispers about forgiving Silas to bait him into confidence. Tonight, they would unveil the truth. As the officiant began the vows, Clara's hands trembled, to have and to hold. A voice boomed from the back of the church. Until eyes teared apart, heads whipped toward the doors. There in the frame, silhouetted by the moon, stood Elijah Kane, alive, bruised, and holding a letter. Gasps. One woman fainted. Another cursed and dropped her purse. Clara didn't blink. Miss Clara, Elijah said, walking down the aisle, "You once said I could run from my past or fight for my future. I ran, but now..." He handed the letter to the sheriff. "I'm here to fight, and I'm not alone." From behind Elijah stepped Luella, and two men in suits with federal badges. Silas Langley paled. "This is madness." Clara stepped back from him. "No, Silas, this is justice." The sheriff opened the letter. Confessions, documents, names, payments, even a sworn testimony from Luella that linked Silas to the cartel, the disappearance of Luella's brother, and a series of deaths masked as accidents. Silas reached into his coat, but Clara was faster. She raised a pistol, the same one Elijah left behind 7 years ago. "I've had enough of men pointing guns and calling it love." Silas froze. The deputies pounced. The gun clattered to the floor. The crowd erupted, in shock, in relief, in awe. Later that night, the town square was quieter. Clara stood alone on the steps of the church, staring at the moon. Elijah approached, slow, careful. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but I had to come back. For you, for truth." Clara turned to him, tears welling. "I don't know if I can trust you again." He nodded. "But I'd like to try," she whispered. Then she walked away. Not toward him, but not away from him either. She stopped, looked back, smiled. Epilogue. Rose Bend rebuilt itself. Silas Langley was sentenced to life. Luella opened a school for girls who had no one. Clara reopened her mother's old inn, now a safe house for those escaping dark pasts. And Elijah, he built homes, quiet ones, for war widows and orphans. Every Sunday, he left wildflowers on Clara's porch. No notes, no expectations, until one day she opened the door and whispered, "You can stay for coffee." The end. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more intriguing content. We love you.